Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Second Take Cinema, where we are not giving a second take to a film, but rather a first take. The lovely folks over at Vertigo Releasing contacted us again with the opportunity to do a preview of a film that is coming out soon, and we jumped at the chance because it was an honour to be asked and because the film sounded interesting. Today, we are talking about New Life. So, New Life is releasing on the 3rd of June 2024 on digital platforms. It is written and directed by John Rosman, starring Sonia Walger, Hayley Erin, and Tony Amendola. It has a runtime of 85 minutes, and the summary that they provided for us goes like this. Jess is a woman on the run, desperate to cross the Canadian border to escape her past. On her tail is Elsa, a resourceful agent whose recent life-altering diagnosis leaves her one step behind. As their chase narrows to the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, holes in Elsa's investigation begin to fill with fresh bodies. Soon the pursuit spirals towards its harrowing confrontation between the two women, in search of meaning and redemption on the razor's edge of catastrophe. Ba-ba-da-bum.
They use lots of the big words.
Ba-ba-da-bum.
Razor's edge.
It was lovely to be asked to do this. We've been asked to do a few of these now.
Yeah.
This one, of the three that we've done so far, this one is my favourite.
Okay.
I can quite honestly say that. This film, despite being low budget, despite being a debut film, is very well shot. It's got a very competent feel to it. Everything feels like it belongs, like it matches. There's not bits that stick out. We've done some of these films before where like these odd bits where you're like, that's a really odd choice. Why have you done that?
Yeah.
And it really like sticks out. CGI helicopter. Whereas this doesn't have that. This feels very uniform.
Yep.
I'm imagining this had a slightly bigger budget than Girl in the Trunk, purely based on the fact that some of these actors are more recognisable. Some of them have been in Lost, some of them have been in Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's new movie.
Yeah, it probably helps as well where they are, though, because some of the films we watched before, such as The Girl in the Trunk, is Danish. So unless you watch a lot of Danish film or TV, probably wouldn't know those actors as much as these, who have more chance of being in Canadian and American TV and cinema.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think their location helps, but yeah, I agree with what you say about it having a much more uniform feel. There's definitely a lot less jank. In fact, there isn't any jank. I'll be honest. Like the visual effects on characters looks good. They
all
never
practical as well, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I can't see any CGI. If there was any, it's well concealed. And yeah, it does its job incredibly well. It's not my style of film, personally, but that is a personal taste issue. So that's not a slight on the film. It is just the way it looks and the type of story it tells isn't particularly my jam, but it is competently made.
Yeah. So the film throws us in the deep end, right in the middle of the ongoing action, with a young woman named Jess, who, when we first see her, she's literally covered in blood.
Yep.
She seems to be wandering into this town looking for something. And it's quite a way into the film before we really find out what she's running from.
Yeah, it's probably you're getting towards 45 minutes, really, before you start to find out what the main thrust of the story is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of preamble.
There is, yeah. We also see a bunch of agent-type characters who we're never really sure who they work for, but it's clearly some sort of very powerful information agency.
Yeah, they've got a lot of basically nerds who can track things.
Yeah, and they can. It's implied that they can hack into like every system in the country.
Yeah, in fact, Elsa Gray, the main woman the main agent, she's got a colleague called Vince that she talks to quite a lot. He's kind of our mainstay. None of the other nerds really have any lines, so we kind of we get everything from her perspective pretty much, and from the perspective of the two lead women. But we also get a little bit from him as well, where he's been kept in the dark.
So this is your standard cat and mouse. Elsa's chasing Jess. We don't know why she's chasing her. At first, we think Elsa's probably the bad guy, because, let's be honest, usually the person who's on the government side is the bad guy.
Yeah.
But we're thrown a curveball relatively early on, which is, and I've certainly never seen this before in a film, Elsa, who's doing the chasing, is also dealing with a medical diagnosis of ALS.
Yes, actually, I have to give props to this film on its use of ALS and how it uses it to as part of an actual plot. Because we've all seen terrible films like The Room, where all of a sudden a character will be like, "Oh yes, I've managed to defeat the cancer," or "Yes, I've got the cancer diagnosis," and it's just some random woman in one scene.
I was gonna say, I've never seen The Room the whole way through, but doesn't the cancer plot line just never get mentioned?
Yeah,
again
it's just mentioned in one scene. Then it's been confirmed I've got the cancer. Okay, but my problem is this, and then it's never brought up again. And that
hi, Mark.
Yeah, and there's like other low budget terrible films like Birdemic, where they like for one scene all of a sudden it's like, the birds are angry with us because we've damaged the environment and this is what we need to do to fix the environment, and it's just for this one scene, and then the rest of it is just literally people attacking birds with coat hangers, but the birds are clearly puppets that have been added on post. This film doesn't do any of that.
No.
What it does is it establishes ALS, but it doesn't just do it for a scene, and it doesn't just do it as, look, we've got a condition in here, haha, isn't it great? It actually is built into Gray's storyline, and the reason why she struggles in a way that other people maybe wouldn't do at doing the tracking work she's been hired for. And it does pay off later in the plot as well in a way that would ruin something of a twist, so I don't want to damage the film in any way. But it is weaved into the story in a believable way that does pay off, and I have to give credit for that, because often, as I say, when they add an issue into a film like this, usually it's just paying lip service, really janky. They avoided that problem.
And that's the main drive of the film, is that duality, in the sense that, without going into spoilers, but Jess kind of reflects the more impulsive side of Elsa.
Yeah.
You know, Elsa's had this life-altering diagnosis where we have a scene early on where she's basically told, your life will never be the same.
And she's only going to degenerate.
And it's like being a prisoner in your own body. Meanwhile, that's reflected in this character who's desperately trying to run away.
Yeah.
And Elsa's having to hunt her down, and doesn't necessarily want to, but understands that it's an inevitability, because if this girl is allowed to roam free, and if she's allowed to roam free, other people are going to get hurt.
Yep.
And if she makes it to Canada, for reasons we can't say because of the plot, there's basically going to be an international incident.
Yes.
And I can't spoil the ending, but the actions that she has to take at the end, it very much, the metaphor there is her sort of shutting that impulsive, panicky side down.
Yeah.
There's a line early in the film when she's talking to a patient who's got a more advanced form of ALS, who does a wonderful job of, I don't know if that person actually has ALS or if it's a performance. Either way, it's really convincing. My only criticism, and it's not a big criticism, because I can fully understand why they had to do it, I'm just warning the audience, it's one of those things that you're going to have to just suspend your disbelief for, otherwise the film wouldn't work, is her ALS does advance rapidly.
Yeah, it's
I
like
work in a
yeah.
hospital. I've dealt with ALS patients. I don't think it advances that quickly.
She basically starts to decay within like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, but I understand, obviously, the constraints of the film.
Yeah, you couldn't have it go over months or years.
Yeah.
It's like the type of story it needs to progress. And to be fair, there are certain things that happen to explain some of it as being like, so for example, she ends up limping with a cane, but that's not necessarily quote unquote just the ALS.
No, it's been worsened by an accident that she has.
Yeah, she has an accident that hurts her ankle, so that exacerbates the problem. So half of that may not even be ALS.
And she whacks her head, don't she?
Yeah. So there are some things that happen that might help explain some of the more seemingly rapid onset of ALS.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it's wonderfully weaved into the plot.
Meanwhile, flipping back to Jessa's story.
Yes.
Jessa's story is quite interesting in the sense that it's actually quite far into the film before she has her first line of dialogue. She's quite a silent character for a good chunk of her first bit.
Well, not to spoil too much, but her whole story is about her being isolated and alone. So I do kind of get that.
But it's a typical on-the-run story, but she has some really good, heartwarming scenes with an elderly couple she meets who sort of offer to take her in. That's quite nihilistic, the way that ends. Again, I can't spoil it. I would just say, though, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and go, this is one of the best films I've ever seen. It's not. It is a low-budget indie movie. But I've really enjoyed it, watching it.
Yeah.
It had a lot of interesting ideas. I thought the acting was pretty solid all the way through, even from, like, support characters.
Yeah, honestly, some of these we've watched, we've been like, oh, I don't think that character quite works, or I don't think that performance quite works. Didn't have that problem with this film. The actors were pretty much spot on for the roles that they were intending.
I'm not going to spoil it, because I actually thought it was really impactful. But there is a moment about 44 minutes in where the whole film, you kind of think you've worked out what's happening and you're in this groove, and the film is just running the risk of becoming a little dull. Like, it's just running the risk of being like, oh, this is going to be slow. When all of a sudden a certain thing happens that I am not going to spoil around the 44-minute mark, that effectively flips the genre of the movie, but simultaneously flips your perception of the two protagonists.
Yeah, and I have to say, I preferred the second half.
I did. In that first half, I was actually thinking Elsa was a villain of some kind.
Yeah.
A sympathetic villain, maybe.
But a villain nonetheless.
But a villain. But I think the moment that the certain thing is revealed was actually done really well.
Yeah.
And considering that this is not officially a horror movie, it was done better than a lot of actual supposed horror movies would do it.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that they relied on really solid practical effects. They didn't try and cheap it out. They all, they must have put some time, effort, and money behind these, like certain prosthetics and things like that. But also, they didn't decide to try and get ahead of themselves. We're going, let's slather it with CGI, and that way we can do whatever we want, which at this budget range would have sucked. And again, we've said this in several different films, but often even big Marvel budget level films can't get the CGI right. Don't try it in an indie film. And props to John Rossman, he didn't. He went, sod that, we're doing it practical.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for John Rossman on that.
Yeah. It's hard to talk about this bit without spoiling it. The interpretation of a certain type of character that's been done to death in cinema.
Yes.
I actually really like this interpretation of them. They actually do feel realistically like they are victims of a kind of... You know what I'm trying to say. This is so awkward trying not to spoil it for this.
Yeah, because it's kind of a big part of the film.
It is.
But if we were to say it, it does spoil the second half of the movie.
Yeah, and I actually don't want to spoil it, because this is probably the first one of these we've done where it's like an early preview, where I actually fully recommend people watch this. I think you have to be prepared for a slow first half. The
I would
first half
recommend it
takes its time.
Yeah, I'd recommend it for horror fans probably more. Again, there's certain things about this that didn't grip me quite as much. But again, I 100% get that. Actually, that's a style choice on my part. Like, for example, the cinematography is brilliantly done, but it's very desaturated and very monotone.
The colour grade, you mean?
Yeah, and I don't like that, personally.
Yeah,
I don't like it when you desaturate in post unless you've got a real specific reason. It tends to make a film look bland to me. But that's personal opinion. That's not fact.
I think maybe it's been done. The only thing I can think of is it's to sell the Pacific Northwest atmosphere.
It's also to make the storyline more bleak because it's quite a bleak storyline.
Yeah, but I think in the same way that, like, any time they do a film, Americans do a film that involves Mexico,
they
colour grade everything a yellow tinge.
Yes.
Because just the unofficial rule of film now is
that
Mexico
everything
is yellow.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like the Pacific Northwest has a similar vibe.
Yeah, it's all desaturated greys and blues.
Yeah, because it is famously a very rainy, very wet...
Well, it's Britain.
Yeah, it's the closest America gets to a British climate, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they've done it.
But that's an irony, because at the moment today, it's bright sunshine, nice greens on all the trees.
True.
So, like, there would be days of the Pacific Northwest, I'm sure, that are like this as well.
Even green's not the same here, though. I was actually going to say to you when we were watching it, there's a scene near the beginning where they're in the woods.
Yeah.
And I was just like, woods in America just isn't the same as woods in Britain. Even in daylight, woods in Britain always look like they're barely alive. Like the trees
They're
always
surrounded by concrete, that's why.
Yeah, the trees always look thin and spindly, and you can always... what you struggle
It's
to
also
get
the
in
type
Britain,
of tree, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. But what you struggle to get in Britain is that feeling of, and it's because it's true, in Britain, it's almost impossible to get lost in the woods.
Well, most of our woods, like, we've got Hockley Woods here, and you've said something similar about Nottingham.
Sherwood Forest.
Sherwood Forest,
Yeah.
they're actually quite small.
They're quite small. This is my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're quite small. So as long as you pick a direction and stick to it, you hit civilization eventually.
Very quickly, actually, to be honest.
Whereas in America, it's very possible to get lost and die in the woods.
Yeah, that just does not happen in the UK.
No, and you've got these bits, because I've filmed in the woods before in the UK, and when you're trying to get that sense of isolation, it's really hard to get.
Yeah, well, because there's always some distant fucking road or something in the background.
There's always a car or a fucking plane flies overhead, or most of the time you can see through the trees to civilization.
Yeah, there'll be there'll be like a random cottage somewhere on a hill.
Whereas in this, you've got this thing where she is just surrounded by these giant redwood trees.
Yeah,
and it doesn't, like you said, it's the type of tree as well. Like, our trees only grow to like what, 10, 20 feet tall, maybe. I don't know.
It's also the width of them. We get a
big
few
thick trees.
Yeah, but not redwood style thick.
No, redwood. I mean, they are tree skyscrapers, aren't they?
Yeah.
When you're in them, you feel.
Well, you feel like you've walked into Jurassic bloody Park.
Yeah. Welcome to Jurassic.
That doesn't happen in the UK. You get there and go, oh, it's a bit boggy.
Yeah, which is a shame.
No, but either way, it does. I see your point. That maybe the colour grading and things like that is to set that tone.
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Because I'm sort of with you and sort of not. Because I do prefer, personally, as a matter of personal taste, I prefer my films a little bit more colourful.
Yeah.
But I also think that this film wouldn't work if you made it more colourful.
It doesn't have to be brightly, it doesn't have to be like, Blade Runner or, I don't know, or Drive or something like that. It doesn't have to be dripping with neons. But I don't know, I don't know. It's personal taste. But I do understand where the aesthetic fits the theme of the film, so...
Yeah. There was one weird thing about this film.
Go on.
They ain't got a lot of budget. And they probably spent a considerable chunk of that budget getting a song by Bob Dylan. And I'm not entirely sure it was necessary to the film.
Yeah, I do have a query on that, because at the end it turns out there's probably 6 licensed songs, but the only one I recognised being played at any point was Bob Dylan, and it's played to death.
I'm pretty sure the others were just instrumental tracks.
Right. In which case there was no point.
Songs.
In which case there wasn't really much point in paying them money for them, was there? Unless they set a specific tone and that fits so well that I missed it. That's probably the other option. Maybe they were perfect. But yeah, the Bob Dylan song is... it's a very popular one. What one is it? Is it?
I don't know Bob Dylan well enough.
No, I've heard it a million times because my parents had the CD when I was younger.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
it recurs about 5 times.
Yeah, and it's always with. Let's be fair, it's always with Elsa. So Elsa uses it, I think, to kind of bring her some peace. But the lyrics don't. At least the lyrics that are played don't seem to directly correlate to her situation. So that feels like a missed mark. And there's also times where it's playing and there's already soundtrack playing. And you're like, don't use the song there then. And then when it kicks in, it kicks in for the credits. And it's the main credits theme when, the credits start. And that's fine. I understand that. That like so many films do that. It's a trope at this point. But it doesn't feel like it's any more earned there than it does earlier in the film. Yeah, so I just didn't think that the song had much correlation. It felt a bit to me like the director really loved the song and was like, yeah, I want to use it. But it didn't feel earned.
I just don't think it was necessary. But, at the same time, it's not like he's wasted his money else. Like, nowhere else had suffered because of it.
No, that's true. It wasn't like, you could have spent that money elsewhere in the film to improve it. The film was well shot, as we say, well done. The visual effects worked. Nothing suffered.
Yeah. I think this is his first film, isn't it, John Rosman?
I don't know. Let me have a look.
It said debut on one of the reviews I read.
Yeah, it looks like New Life is the only thing, actually. There's literally not even a short or anything, at least not on his IMDb.
Yeah, this is a really strong debut.
Yeah.
The fact that he's debuted with a film this strong, I'm guessing is a Nepo baby, but... No. Fair play to John Rosman. This is a really solid debut feature.
Yeah.
I wish my debut feature was this solid. And I know a lot of other people whose films I've worked on, or people who are friends of mine, who I'm sure wish their debut feature was as solid as this. I'm very hopeful that he gets to do more. Because I'd be interested in seeing what else he can do.
Yeah, the fact that he wrote and directed it is not just a strong direction from him, it's strong writing. Again, mixing the ALS plotline in seamlessly and not just as some added thing in one scene. Brilliant. I'm very excited to see what else John Rosman comes up with.
Yeah, I would fully recommend to our audience that when New Life drops on the 3rd of June, that you seek it out on digital distribution.
Definitely give it a shot. I mean, it's a good film. It's a good film.
And if we want originality in our movies, as we say, stuff like this is the sort of thing we need to be supporting.
It's better than Marvel movies anyway.
A lot of the recent... I mean, I like Marvel movies, but they're a different type of movie.
They are, yeah. Marvel. This isn't for a Marvel crowd. This is for a more...
As we've discussed before, I like Marvel movies, but I dislike the way they've dominated the industry. I think there's room... unlike in Westerns where they're like, this town ain't big enough for the both of us. I think there's room for every type of film in the world. With the rate we crank content out these days, and the rate it's being consumed, I don't understand why there's not room for low-budget things like this, Marvel movies, comedy. We've talked before, haven't we? I'm going on a slight tangent here, but we've talked before, haven't we, about Hollywood doesn't make straight comedies anymore.
No.
Everything's got to be mixed with another genre because there's almost an idea that comedies won't sell.
That might be because of all the parody shit from the 2000s.
So I think we're pretty much done with this film.
Yes.
I was quite happy with this one. Like I said, not the best film I've ever seen.
No.
But a very solid debut, an interesting watch, an interesting spin on a genre that is a little bit tired at this point.
Definitely.
I'm pretty happy with having seen this. I do not feel like I have wasted my time.
No, definitely not. It was a competently made movie. Again, certain things weren't in my particular style, but the film was competently made. The twist it brings in works brilliantly, and it managed to inject something of more importance than its general narrative and interweave it with that narrative perfectly in a great blend. I can't believe it's his first film. considering we've seen worse from people who've done a lot more.
Yeah.
Congratulations, that man, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from you.
Me too. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Remember, New Life releases on digital platforms on June the 3rd, 2024. And make sure you stay up to date with our feed, because we will be back shortly with more Second Take Cinema.